I'm recording it. So, last week we did talk about. So last week I told you we have two agents in the market. We have producers and we have consumers. So last week we talked about those who consume. So we did talk about demand. So this week we are going to talk about producers. So we'll talk about supply. And supply is just the opposite of demand. So most of the things that we did last week, we'll just go through the same things again, but in the opposite direction. Okay, so last week we did talk about demand function and demand curve. Um, then we did talk about things that affect the demand curve that causes the demand curve to shift. So we are coming to talk about the same thing, but the supply side. So we defined uh, demand to be people's willingness and their ability to buy products at different prices. Okay. So supply is, if you are defining supply, also talk about your willingness and you should have the ability to sell the good in the market. So supply of a commodity refers to the various quantities of the commodity which a seller is willing and is able to sell at different prices in a given at a given point in time. Okay. So if you can classify as a seller or you are supplying a good, you should be willing to sell the good. So if you have a good and you're not willing to sell it, you're not supplying the good. So if you are willing to sell the good, but you don't have the ability to sell the good, that one you are not part of supply. So ability to sell the good means that you have the ability to produce the good. And we know we have factors of production, land, labor, capital, and an entrepreneur who combines these factors of production to produce a product. And you know these factors of production are come at a cost. The entrepreneur will have to pay for land, have to pay for labor, have to pay for capital. So the ability to produce the good, you should have the ability to produce the good. So you should have the resources to produce the good before you can even sell it in the market. So supply is what the seller is able and willing to offer for sale. Okay. So if you have a laptop and you want to, you are not willing to sell it, you won't classify as those who are selling laptops. Okay. If you want to sell laptop, but you don't even have the money to produce a laptop, then you're also not part of supply. You are just wishful thinking, something like that. So we'll talk about a supply function. A supply function just describes how much of good S will be supplied at alternative prices of X, that the price of the good itself. The supply function is also a function of price of related goods. So if you're selling ideal milk, you look at the price of peak milk, for instance. Then it's a function of input prices. So I told you the production function is a function of land. You have to combine factors of production in order to produce an output. So for you to produce an output, you have to talk about the input prices. You have to employ these inputs. So land, capital, labor. You have to pay them. So if you are going to produce an output, it depends on input prices. So selling an output in the market will depend on the input prices. Then selling an output in the market also depends on the level of technology, you use in producing an output. So for instance, let me share a Word document. Let me get a Word document and share it. Stop sharing. Okay, so what I'm saying is, if you want to produce an output, we'll do this in details when we come back to school. Like we have production in the long run, in the short run, and all those things. So if you want to produce output, it's a function of land, labor, we have capital, we have raw materials, We even have the entrepreneur. We have so many things that produce an output. Okay. Then we also have technology. Technology is also a function of. So, for instance, if we consider a Cobb-Douglas production function, I told you we have different forms of a function. Okay, but if you consider a Cobb-Douglas production function, you can have A is a K raised to the power A raised to the power alpha. L raised to the power L raised to the power beta. So this is how a Cobb-Douglas function looks like. Okay. So the A there talks about the level of technology. Capital is the K is capital, L is labor. Okay. So you, the producer combines these inputs in addition to a level of technology in order to produce an output. So, for instance, if you are a typist and we're using typewriter in the year 2000s, now there was the introduction of desktop computers. A desktop computer will work better for a typist than a typewriter. Okay, for a typist, if you make a mistake, you have to cancel it, or sometimes they even have to tear the paper away. Okay, but if you are using a computer and you are using Word, if you make a mistake, you just have to go backspace like this. Okay, and it will clear what you want to clear. Okay, then then a desktop too, you cannot carry a desktop around, but the introduction of laptops, you'll be more effective when you are using laptops than when you are using desktop. Okay, so things like that. So the level of technology also affects the production of a product. Okay, so if with typewriter, the typist was typing like 20 pages of a paper, with desktop you can do maybe 100, with laptop you can do maybe 200. Okay, so the level of technology affects the quantity of the good that you want to sell in the market. Okay, so the supply function is also a function of taxes. Okay, so the government will come into the market and as a different agent, and the government will take taxes, we impose taxes on the goods that is being sold in the market. The producer cannot shift all the tax to the consumer. It will depend on something we'll do next week, elasticities. Okay, how the the demand curve of the product will determine whether the producer will have to share the tax between himself and the consumer, or have to shift everything to the consumer, or he has to take everything and pay the tax to the government. So it depends. So taxes affect the supply of a good, and taxes affect the supply of a good because when the government is taking taxes, the government cannot come to the consumer and take the consumer. Okay, so the seller will sell the good in the market, and when he sell the good in the market, the price of the good that he will sell in the market, he has to give some part of it to the government. So we have different two types of taxes. We have lump sum tax or per unit tax. Okay, or you can also call it excise tax or fixed tax. Okay, that one, when you sell one good in the market, you have to give some particular amount of the money you get from the good you sold in the market to the government. Then we have percentage tax. So an example, of a lump sum tax or a fixed tax is VAT. Okay. Then we have percentage tax. It depends. Percentage tax would be like corporate income taxes and stuff like that. So that one, it depends. So sometimes we have levels of income that you have to pay taxes on it. Okay, so percentage tax. So taxes also affect the supply function. Then we have number of producers. So for instance, and you note that I told you in the under demand that we are not interested in the demand function of an individual person. Okay, we are interested in the demand function of the whole industry. So we are interested in every consumer in the market. We are also interested in every producer in the market, not a producer of one person. We only consider the producer of one one person if you are talking about different types of markets. I told you have four different types here: monopolies, we have perfect competition, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. So for monopolies, that individual producer is also the producer for the whole industry. Okay, we are talking about, for instance, if you're in a perfect competitive market, people who are selling, for instance, agricultural products. Okay, so we have a farmer in my village, we have a farmer in Ishak village, we have farmers in other villages in this country, and most of them produce maize. Okay, so you're talking about producers of maize, so all producers of maize. And different regions will have different things that affect their production of maize. In the north, maybe they'll have just one rainy season, but when you come to the south, we have major rainy season and we have minor rainy seasons. In both rainy seasons, you can cultivate some amount of maize. Okay. So the number of producers also affects the supply function, and this is because suppose we have 100 producers in the market and they are all selling 1 unit of a product. It means that we are going to get 100. We are going to sell 100 units of the product in the market. If the number of producers increases to 110, okay, then and if each producer is selling 1 unit, then it means that we are going to sell 110 units of the products. Is okay. So number of producers also affects the supply curve. So we'll talk about individual and market supply. So an individual supply function just shows the variable that influence the quantity supply of a particular product by an individual producer. And as a manager, we are doing managerial economics. So as a manager, you are not interested in the individual supply function of an individual. We are more interested about the market supply function of that particular product. So that shows the various variables that influence the quantity supplied of a particular product by all producers in the market, and that's affected by the number of producers in the market. So we are interested in the market's supply function. So now we'll talk about what type of supply function do you want? I've told you under demand that we have different forms of a function. We have a quadratic function, we have a Liontiev function, we have cubic function, we have Douglas function, we have constant CES function. Jessica, please on your microphone, okay? We have CES functions, but for simplicity purposes, we are going to consider only linear demand functions in this course. Linear supply functions in this course for simplicity purposes. We are only using linear supply functions for simplicity purposes. So for us to make simple and to be easy for us to make analysis, we are going to use linear supply function. Okay, so linear supply function is just a representation of the supply function in which the supply for a given good is a linear function of prices, input prices, and other variables that are affecting supply. So what we mean by a linear function is that the independent variables, so the exponential variables, are all of power 1. Okay, if one of them is has an index 2, then that particular function will not be a linear function, but it will be a quadratic function. So you see that we have PS here is a variable, is of power 1, but we don't write the power 1. PY is of power 1, PW is of power 1, TS is of power 1, T is of power 1, and number of producers is also of power 1. Okay, so we are interested, so what you are interested in is that all the exponential variables, the highest power of all the exponential variable is 1. Okay, so we have a linear function. So in the same way, we can estimate this supply function by talking to the firm's research department, or the firm will employ an economic consultant to estimate the supply function for them. That is when they have the data for it. Okay, so you use ordinary least squares or different ways to estimate the supply function for them. So from a supply function, we can get a supply curve. From a supply function, we can get a supply curve. From a demand function, we're able to get a demand curve. The only difference between the supply function and a supply curve is that for a supply curve, it shows the relationship between only the price of the product and the quantity supplied of the product. The supply curve shows the relationship between quantity supplied and the price of the product, while supply function shows the relation between the quantity supply of the product and the price of the products, the price of related goods, taxes, technology, and so many other things. Okay, so the supply curve is a subset of the supply function. If you have the supply function, you can actually find the supply curve. Okay, so the supply curve shows the relationship between the quantity supply of the good and the price of the good itself, all things being equal. Okay, so you have to use all things being equal to be supplied. Okay. So before we talk about the relationship between the type of relationship between the quantity supplied and the price of the product, we have to talk about reservation price of the producer. Last week we did talk about the reservation price of the consumer. And I told you the reservation price of the consumer is the highest amount of money the consumer is willing to pay for a particular product. Okay. The reservation price of a producer is the lowest amount of money the producer is willing to accept for a particular product. Okay. So the lowest amount the producer is willing to accept for a particular product is known as the reservation price of the producer. Okay. So we go to a table like this. So suppose we are at point D. Okay. We are at point D and the price of the good is 0.5. Okay. Then one producer's reservation price is 0.5. So it means that the lowest amount that producer is willing to accept in order to sell the product in the market is 0.5. Okay. So if only one person is willing to sell at the price of 0.5, it means that we'll be able to sell 1 unit of the product. Okay. Now, when the price increases to 1.0, then at the price of 1.0, one person is also willing to sell the lowest amount that that person is willing to accept for the product is 1.0. So it means that this person will sell the product at 1.0. And this person has a higher incentive to even sell the product because he was willing to accept 0.5, but now he's getting 1.0. So this person will sell the good in the market, and this person will also sell the good in the market. So at the end of the day, we'll be able to sell 2 units of the product in the market. Okay. If the price increases to 1.5 and an additional person's reservation price is 1.5, then it means that we'll be able to sell 3 units of the product because this person will sell, the person whose reservation price was 1.0 will sell, the person whose reservation price was 0.5 will also sell. So we'll be able to sell 3 units of the product. And then when the price is 2 cedis, we have an additional person whose reservation price is 2 cedis. So we're able to sell 4 units of the product. Okay, so you see that when the price was increasing from 0.5 to 1 to 1.5 to 2, you see that quantity supplied was increasing from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Okay, so here, when price is increasing, quantity supplied is increasing. So there's a positive relationship between quantity supplied and the price of the good. Okay, there's a positive relationship between quantity supplied and the price of the good. So this is how the supply curve look like. Okay, when price is increasing from P1 to P2, quantity demanded increases. Sorry, quantity supply increases from Q1 to Q2. Okay, so when the price is 1 P1, producers are willing to supply Q1. When the price is Q2, P2, producers are willing to supply Q2. So when the price is increasing, quantity supplied is increasing. So there's a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. Okay, so this is how the supply curve looks like. Okay, it slopes upwards. Okay, so note that a movement from point A to point B, which is on the same supply curve, is caused by changes in the price of the good itself. So price increase from P1 to P2 and quantity increase from Q1 to Q2. So we call this change in quantity supplied. Change in quantity supplied. And change in quantity supplied is a movement along a particular supply curve. Change in quantity supplied is a movement along a particular supply curve. For instance, from point A to point B. Okay, and this is caused by changes in the price of the good itself. This is caused by changes in the price of the good itself. Now we'll talk about so when we're defining the supply curve, we hold other variables constant. So we said all things being equal. What if we relax that assumption? If we relax those assumptions, then we have to talk about how the supply curve will behave when there are changes in the other factors of supply that we held constant when we are defining a supply curve. Okay. So changes in these variables shift the supply curve either downwards or upwards. Changes in the other factors that we had constant when we are defining the supply curve will shift the supply curve either upwards or downwards. Okay, so they will shift the supply curve either upwards or downwards. Okay, a shift of the supply curve upwards is a decrease in supply. A shift in the supply curve downwards is an increase in supply. A shift upwards is decrease. A shift downwards is increase. Okay, so the other variable that influence supply but are left constant in driving the supply curve are known as supply shifters. Okay, so if the other variables like input prices, like taxes, like level of technology, number of producers, expectation about prices, if they change, it shifts the supply curve. So we call them supply shifters. Okay. So a shift in the supply curve is known as change in supply. So we have change in quantity supplied, which is caused by changes in the price of the good itself, holding all other things constant. And it's a movement along a particular supply curve. Change in quantity supply, a movement along a particular supply curve. It's caused by changes in the price of the good itself. And then with all things being equal, okay? But change in supply is a movement, is a shift in the supply curve from, for instance, S0 to S1 and S0 to S2. Okay, if the supply curve shifts upwards like this, we call it a decrease in supply. If the supply curve shifts downwards like this, we call it an increase in supply. So change in supply is caused by changes in the other factors of production that we held constant when we're defining the supply curve. A change in quantity supplied is caused by changes in the price of the good itself, all things being equal. And it's a movement along the same supply curve, like from point A to point B, is caused by changes in the price of the good itself. From S0 to S1, from S0 to S2 is caused by changes in the other factors of production, like input prices and those things that we had constant when we defined in the supply curve. Okay. So now we are coming to investigate how changes in these other factors will affect the supply curve. Okay, so last week we did talk about how changes in the other factors of demand will shift the demand curve. Okay, and income we did talk about a normal good and inferior good, and price of labor we did talk about substitutes and complements. So those are the things that we're coming to do here. So the first thing we are going to talk about is input prices. We're coming to talk about input prices. So I'll show you an illustration, then we'll use that one to see how the curve will shift, okay? So input prices are the price of all inputs or factors of production, okay? So I told you have factors of production are land, labor, capital, we have an entrepreneur. So the entrepreneur will combine these other factors of production to produce a product, okay? Input prices affect the cost of production, and therefore the prices at which producers are willing to supply different amounts of output. So now, this is the illustration. Suppose there are only two factors of production. So suppose we have capital, we have labor as a factors of production, and suppose we have a Cobb-Douglas production function. Okay, so a Cobb-Douglas production function will be, so Q is a function of just capital and labor. And we have this relationship between capital and labor. So Q is equal to A, K, L. Okay, so this is a Cobb-Douglas production function. The alpha here is 1, beta here is 1. Okay, so alpha is raised to the power, K raised to the power alpha. So the alpha is equal to 1. L raised to the power alpha. The L raised to the power beta. The beta is also equal to 1. Okay, so this is an example of a Cobb-Douglas function, and A is a level of technology. Okay. Okay. And so the firm will have to employ capital and labor. Okay. The firm will have to employ capital and labor, and this capital and labor are not for free. The firm has to pay for capital. The firm has to pay for labor. Okay. So because the firm has to pay for capital and the firm has to pay for labor, the firm will have something we call total cost. So the total cost is the amount of money the firm will spend on capital and the amount of money the firm will spend on labor. Okay. So total cost is equal to the amount the firm will spend on capital plus the amount the firm will spend on labor. And the amount the firm will spend on capital will be the per unit price of capital, which is known as the interest rate, times the total quantity of capital the firm employs. And the per unit, the amount of money the firm will spend on labor will be the per unit price of labor, which is wage rates, times the number of labor the firm employs. Okay. So for instance, if you want to be a fashion designer, okay, so for a fashion designer, you're assuming we just need two inputs. So you need a sewing machine. So a sewing machine, for instance, will be your capital. Then labor, your labor will be seamstress or tailor, depending on whether you are sewing for female or male. Now, some tailors can sew female clothes, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so either seamstress or tailors, they are all classified under labor. Okay, so suppose you have more money, so you are going to use two sewing machines. Okay, you are going to use two sewing machines. Then you are going to employ three people to do the work for you. So two will be sewing and one will be cutting for them. Okay. Okay. So the amount of money you will spend on capital will be, I suppose the price of sewing machine is 100 cedis. Then it means that the amount of money you're going to spend on capital will be the total number of sewing machines you want to buy, that is 2, times the per unit price of sewing machine, that is 100. Okay, so you're going to spend 2 times 100. So you're going to spend 200 on sewing machine. Okay, so the per unit price of sewing machine is 100 times the total quantity of sewing machine you want to buy, that is 2. Okay, so that will be 200. The amount of money you will spend on labor will be the amount of labor you employ. In this case, you say you're employing 3 people, times the per unit price of labor. If one person, you are going to pay one person 50 cedis, you are going to pay one person 50 cedis, then the amount of money you spend on labor will be 50 cedis times 3, and that will be 150. So in all, the amount of money you have to spend will be 350, which will be equal to 200 that you are spending on capital plus the 150 you are spending on labor. Okay. Okay, and at any particular point in time, we assume that you have a fixed amount of money that you want to spend on capital and labor. Okay. So here, the R you see here is a per unit price of capital, and we call it interest rates. The W you see is a wage rate. The TC is the total cost. Q is output, and A is a level of technology. Okay. K is capital, L is labor. Okay. So now suppose A is equal to 10, K is equal to 5. So you're employing 5 units of labor. Sorry, 5 units of capital, and you're employing 10 units of labor. Now suppose per unit price of capital is 2, and the per unit price of labor is 5. Okay. So in this case, your total cost is equal to RK plus WL. So your total cost is equal to, your R is equal to 2, your K is equal to 5, plus your W is equal to 5, and your L is equal to 10. So this will be 60. So 10 plus 50 will give you 60. And if you are employing this number of capital and this number of labor, this is the amount of quantity that you are going to produce. Okay, so your A is equal to 10. You're employing 5 units of capital, you're employing 10 units of labor. You are going to produce 500 units of your products. Okay. Now suppose the per unit price of capital increases from 2 to 4. Okay, so now per unit price of capital is not 2 anymore, but it is now 4. With total cost constant. So you haven't taken any additional loan in order to employ more capital. Okay. So And you note that if the per unit price of capital is now 2 and you are still spending, you still want to spend employ 10 units of labor, it means that out of your 60 cedis, you are going to spend 10 times 5 on labor. Then the remaining 10 cedis is what you are going to use to employ capital. Because the price of capital has increased, you are not going to be able to employ 5 capital because now the price of capital is not 2. If you put 4 here and you multiply it by 5, it means that you are going to spend 20 days on capital. 20 plus 50 will give you 70. Note that we are assuming that your total cost is the same. You haven't taken additional loan in order to do that. So your total cost is the same. So this employing 5 units of capital here is not feasible when the price increases to 4. Okay. So we are going to find how much would how much capital would the firm employ if the price increases to from 2 to 4. Okay. So now your total cost is 60. You haven't changed your total cost. Your per unit price of capital is now 4. It's not 2 anymore. We have 4K plus you are still employing 5 units of labor, 10 units of labor at the price of 5 cedis. So 5 times 10. Okay. We have, so this becomes a simple linear equation. 60 is equal to 4K plus 50. Okay. So 60 is equal to 4K plus 50. We are making K the subject. So we turn 50 to this side. So we have 60 minus 50 is equal to 4K. We have 10 is equal to 4K. And if you divide both 2 by 4, we have K is equal to 2.5. Okay. One minute. Okay, so now we are able to employ only 2.5 units of capital. So if you substitute 2.5 units of capital into the production function again, we are going to get 10 times 2.5 times 10. Okay, so this is going to be 250. So you notice that we haven't said anything about the price of the product in the market. Okay, we are talking about the input prices. So when the input price increase, an input price increase from 2 to 4, we are reducing our quantity that we are selling in the market from 500 to 250. So an increase in an input prices will shift the supply curve upwards. Okay. So as the price of input increases or the price of the product being constant, producers are willing to produce less. Okay. So at the same price, so initially, this is the initial quantity that the 500 that we are producing when our input price of capital is 2. So at the same price, we are producing 200, 500 here. So input price increase from the price of capital increased from 2 to 4. And we are now producing 250 units of the product. Okay. So at the same price, we are now producing less. So increase in input prices, increase the cost of production. So with the price constant, price shifts upwards. which is a decrease in supply. Okay, so the price has shifted upwards from S0 to S1. So there is a negative relationship between input prices and supply. There's a negative relationship between input prices and supply. Okay, there's a negative relationship between input prices. So input prices, there's a negative relation between input prices. There's a negative relationship between input prices and supply. So when you take QS for instance, the sign here is supposed to be negative. Okay. So if on the other hand there's a reduction in input prices, that will shift the supply curve downwards. Okay. If on the other hand there's a reduction in input prices, that will shift the supply curve downwards. If on the other hand there's a reduction in input prices, that will shift the supply curve downwards. So we'll talk about technology. Okay, so the level of technology. So like I told you about the typist. Okay, if you're a typist and you are using a typewriter and there was a desktop computers, then there was laptops, and nowadays you can even type up on your tablets or phones if you have WPS. Okay, so you become more effective when the technology is we are advancing in technology. Okay, so technology influences how the good or service is actually produced. Advanced technology that makes it possible to produce a given output at lower cost that have the effects on increasing supply. Okay, so when there's an increase in advancements in technology, the supply curve shifts downwards. There's an increase in supply. Okay, so like the example I gave you about the typist. If you're a typist, you're using a typewriter and you're able to type maybe 30 pages a day. When there was a desktop computer, you'll be able to type more. Okay, you'll be able to type like 100. If there's laptop that you can carry around, so when you're going for lunch, you can even carry your laptop along. Then you can type more. Okay, you can maybe type like 120. If you're using your phone or tablet, you can type like more than maybe 200 or so. So when there's an advancement in technology, it shifts the supply curve downwards. Okay, so which is an increase in supply. So there's a positive relationship between technology and supply. There's a positive relationship between technology and supply. Then we have number of firms. We have number of firms or number of producers. Like I said, if you have 100 people and they are producing 1 unit of the products in the market, if you have 100 people and they are producing 1 unit of the products in the market, the total number of quantity will sell in the market will be 100 units. If the number of producers increases to 110 and each of them is producing 1 unit of the product at the same price, we are going to sell 110 of the products. Okay, so with increase in the number of producers shifts the supply curve downwards. Increase in the number of producers shifts the supply curve downwards, and this is an increase in supply. So there's a positive relationship between number of producers and supply. There's a positive relationship between number of producers and supply. So if the number of producers decreases to the supply curve will shift upwards. Okay, so I told you about the increase. So the decrease will be the opposite direction. Okay. Then we'll talk about taxes. So taxes affect the cost of production. Okay. So for instance, if before taxes, the price of your good is 10 cedis. So when you sell the good, you are going to, as a producer, you're going to keep all the 10 cedis. Okay. If there are no taxes and you sell the good, you take the price. So if the price of the good is 10 cedis, all the 10 cedis will come to you, the producer. Okay. So now suppose the government imposes a tax of maybe 5 cedis on each good that you sell in the market. So it means that when at any price that you sell the good in the market, you have to give 5 cedis to the government. Okay, the government will come for that 5 cedis. If you sell 1 unit of the good in the market, if you sell 2 units of the good, the government will take 5 cedis times 2. Okay, so if the price, if the imposition after the imposition of the tax, you are going to sell the good in the market for 12 cedis. If you are going to sell the good in the market for 12 cedis, then it means that when you sell the 12 cedis, when you sell the good for 12 cedis, you have to give 5 cedis to the government. So what comes to you, the producer, is 12 minus 5. So at the end of the day, when you sell the good in the market for 12 cedis, you are going to get 5 cedis, 7 cedis for yourself, and you give 5 cedis to the government. Okay, so taxes reduces the cost. Taxes reduces the amount of goods that producers sell in the market. When there's an increase in tax, it shifts the supply upwards, and this is how we illustrate the effect of taxes on the supply curve. And note that taxes affect only the supply curve. Taxes affect only the supply curve because it's a producer that will sell the good in the market. The government will take the tax from the producer. Okay. So we have 2 types of taxes. We have excise tax, a lump sum tax, or fixed tax, or per unit tax. Okay. Then we have ad valorem tax or percentage tax. Okay. So we'll talk about a lump sum tax first. Then we'll talk about ad valorem tax. Okay. So I'm going to illustrate to you how you form a new supply curve. So this is an old supply curve, S0. This is a new supply curve. How do you find this new supply curve if there's an imposition of a tax? Okay. Now for a lump sum tax first. So this is a lump sum tax demonstration. So suppose the demand and supply functions are given respectively as, so demand is equal to QD is equal to A minus DP. That there's a negative relationship between quantity demanded and the price of the goods. So that's why this is negative. Okay. Then QS is equal to C plus DP. So there's a positive relationship between supply and the quantity and the price of the good. Okay. So this is plus DP. Okay. Now suppose the government imposed a lump sum tax on every good sold. So if you sell 1 unit in the market, the government is going to take T from the price of the good that you sell in the market. So what you do is, in order to find the new supply curve, you have to substitute P minus T, because when you sell the good in the market for price, you have to give T to the government. Okay. So I'll make a correction for here so that this P minus T will be different from the P in the demand and the supply function curves. Okay. So I'll do that first before I send you the slides. So for you to get, yes?
Please, you said quite the same thing last week, but unfortunately we couldn't get that slide.
You said, what did you say?
You said quite the same thing last week concerning you rectifying some things before sending the slide, but we couldn't get it.
Yes, because the courses the note is the same, so I have to finish with the quoting before I give you the slides. So when I finish today, I'll give you the slides for last week and this week. They are together. See, have you seen it?
Oh, okay.
Applications of demand and supply. That's why.
Oh, okay.
Is it okay?
Oh, yes.
And you're also supposed to make notes. You don't have to wait for my notes.
At the rate at which we are moving, I doubt the notes will be.
The rate at which we are moving fast.
Very fast.
Very. Are you sure? Because this thing we did it last week.
Yes.
Yes. So.
All right.
Okay. So the moment there's an imposition of a tax, we will ask you to find a new supply curve from the old supply curve. And the logic about finding the new supply curve is that, so I told you before the imposition of a tax, when you sell the good in the market, the whole price comes to you, the producer. Okay. And then when you when there's an imposition of a tax, when you sell the good in the market, you have to take that amount of the tax and give it to the government. So not everything will come to the producer. Okay, so the producer will take into consideration the tax that the government is imposing, okay, in the market, and then he will uh, find a way to incorporate the tax into the new supply curve. Okay, and we do that by just substituting P minus T, the amount of money that comes to the producer. Okay, the amount of money that comes to the producer is the price that he will sell the good in the market for minus the tax. Okay, so what comes to the producer when there's an imposition of tax is P minus T. Note that when there's no taxes, what comes to the producer is P, okay? But when there's an imposition of the tax, when he sell the good in the market, he has to give taxes to uh, the government. So you have to subtract the T from the P, okay? So you substitute P minus T in place of P in the old supply curve. So suppose this is your old supply curve. You have QS is equal to C plus DP. So this is our old supply curve. Our new supply curve will be equal to C plus D. So instead of P here, we have to substitute P minus T. Okay. And this P is not the same as this P. So that's why I said I have to make a correction. So I'll put a subscript here like PT. So that you see that this is price after tax. And this is like price before tax. Okay. So I'll put PT here so that you distinguish between this P and this P. Okay, or I can write P new, so like new price, because the firm will not going to sell the good at the same price. It will only sell at the same price if the elasticity of demand is some way. Okay, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so in that case, he will take the tax and he will pay the tax to the government. But because of elasticities, most of the time the producer and the consumer will share the amount of the tax. Okay, so for instance, I said if the price of the good is 10 cedis, okay, before tax, and after tax, if the price after a tax of 5 cedis, if the price of the good is 12 cedis, when the firm sells the good for 12 cedis, the firm have to give uh, 5 cedis to the government. So what comes to the firm is 7 cedis. He's not getting the 10 cedis. So it means that he's paying 3 cedis out of the tax. And the consumer is paying 2 cedis because initially the consumer was paying 10, now he's paying 12. So the share of the consumer will be uh, 12 minus 10. So the new price minus the old price. Then the producer will take the rest, okay, of the tax. So that is how they share the tax. Okay, I think I'll add it to the notes and then you look at it. So, and you should note that. So this is how, if you have a lump sum tax and asks you to find a new supply curve, this is how the new supply curve will look like. So your old supply curve is QS is equal to C plus DP. In place of this P, you substitute P minus T to get the new supply curve. There's not how do you call it? Rocket science, okay? Just substitute P minus T in place of P here when you have there's an imposition of a lump sum tax, okay? Then we have another type of a tax. We call that ad valorem tax or a percentage tax, okay? So in this case, the taxes is in percentage form. The taxes are in percentages. So it has the same logic as the per unit tax. So before the imposition of the tax, when the firm sell the goods in the market, he has 100% of the price. He takes the 100% of the price. But suppose the government impose a tax of maybe 10%. Okay, so it means that after selling the good in the market, the firm will have to take 10% of the 100% and give it to the government. Okay, so when you have an ad valorem tax, this is how you incorporate it into a new supply curve. You subtract so what comes to the firm is 1 minus the percentage of the tax, and this T you have to first transform it into decimals. So if it is 10%, 10% is 0.1, 100 divided by 10. Okay, If it is 20%, divide 20 by 10. Oh, sorry, 20 by 100, and you get 0.2 as 20%. So if you subtract the 0.1, for instance, if the tax is 10%, subtract 0.1 from 1, you get 0.9. So it means that the firm is getting 90% of the new price. He will pay 10% to the government. Okay. If it is 20%, 1 minus 0.2, it means that he will give 20% to the government, and the firm will have 80% of the new price. Okay, so here too, I'll make this P here so that it will distinguish between the P here and the P here. Okay. Okay, so if it's ad valorem tax, all that you have to do is you have to multiply the P here by 1 minus T. You have to multiply the P here by 1 minus T. You put it in brackets. So this multiplies this and it multiplies that. Okay.
Sir, so
Yes.
where the P is the new price?
Is that what are you
I'm
saying?
asking where the P is the new price.
Yeah, this P. So I'll make this PT. Okay, I'll make this correction PT so that it will distinguish between the old price and the new price. Okay, so that I have two. The prices will be different. This price is not the same as this price. Okay, I don't know the day when you find a new equilibrium, the prices will be different. It won't be the same. Okay. So so like the example I gave you about before the tax, if the price was 10 cedis, when the government imposes a tax, now you're selling the good for 12 cedis. So there are differences in the prices. Okay, so for instance, this P here in the new supply curve will be different from the P in the old supply curve. Is it okay? Now, when we do an example, you will see what I was talking about. Okay. Okay. So the new supply curve for ad valorem tax, all that you have to do is you have to multiply the P by 1 minus T. For the lump sum tax, you substitute. Okay, you don't multiply, you substitute P minus T in place of P. Okay, you do that here. Here you substitute, here you multiply. Okay, and the T here is per unit. T here is percentages. Okay, so here first you have to transform it into decimals before you can do this. If it is 10%, you go and write 1 minus 10. Everything you do here will be wrong. Okay. So increase imposition of taxes shift the supply curve upwards. Who can tell me the opposite of tax? If it is not tax, it is what?
Subsidy.
Subsidy.
Yes. So if there's a subsidy, instead of minus, you put plus. Okay. So here will be 1 plus X. Okay. Here will be P plus T. Is it okay for subsidy? It's plus. So this one will be P plus S for subsidy. This one will be 1 plus small s for subsidy. Is it okay? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So for subsidy, it shifts the supply curve downwards. Taxes shift the supply curve upwards. Okay. So we'll talk about producer expectations. Producer expectations. Suppose if you're a producer and you expect the price of your product to increase tomorrow, what will you do today? You will hold the goods, wait till tomorrow before you sell the good, right? Right? So we used to have that
Yes,
situation.
sir.
Yeah, we used to have that situation in Ghana when the government was giving the price of oil. So on maybe Friday, the government will say on Monday, the price of oil will increase to maybe from 10 cedis a gallon to maybe 12 cedis a gallon. So what the producers, the service stations were doing was that during the weekend, they will tell you that there's no oil. Okay, so you see like long queues, people wanting to buy fuel. Okay, but they'll not tell you to them. They'll wait till like when the price increases. Okay, so when there's when producers expect the price of a product to increase, they tend to sell less of the product now. Okay, so initially, if the price was 10 cedis and now they are selling maybe 100 units of the product, if they expect the price to increase to 12 cedis in the near future, they will hold some of the products. So we are talking about a future price. We are not talking about the actual price. So at the same price, at the actual price, they will sell less of the good and then keep some and sell it at a higher price in the near future. Is it okay? Like tomorrow. Yeah. So expectation about prices shift the supply curve upwards. Expectation about prices, expectation about increase in price. Sorry, expectation about increase in price shift the supply curve upwards. If they expect the price to reduce tomorrow, they will sell more now. Okay, and prices are most of the time they don't decrease. Only nowadays I see fuel prices coming down. Yep. Okay. So that's all about like how the factors of production, the factors of supply, how they change, and they will change the uh, supply curve. Okay. So do an example under supply. Then we'll talk about market equilibrium. So market equilibrium will combine both producers and then the consumers. So consumers demand and producers supply. Combine them and we'll get market equilibrium. Okay. Okay, so an economic consultant for S Corporation again recently provided the firm's marketing manager with the estimates of the supply function for the firm's products. So QSS is equal to 200 plus 3PS plus 3PS minus 4PW minus EP, where QS, so this should be QSS. So QS is the amount supplied of good S. PS is the price of good S. EP represents suppliers' expectation about future prices. PW is the price of an input used to make good S. So suppose good S is sold for 40 cedis per unit. Price of input is 10 cedis per unit. And suppliers' expectation about prices is 200 cedis. How many of good S are sold? How many of good S are sold? Derive the supply curve for good S and sketch the supply curve of good S. Okay, so how many of the goods are sold? So what you have to do is you have to extract the data from the question. And from the question, you are given the supply function and you are given the equilibrium prices of equilibrium values of price of the good, the price of input, and the expectation about future prices. Okay. So in order to find the quantity of the goods sold, all that you have to do is to substitute for all the explanatory variables to find the number of good S producers are willing to sell in the market. Okay. So here, what you have to do is you write the supply function. So 200 QS is equal to 200 plus 3PS minus 4PY minus EP. The next thing you have to do is to substitute for the PS, PW, and E. So PS is given in the question is 40, PW is given in the question is 10, and EP is given in the question is 200. Okay, so 200 minus 200 will cancel out. This is 120 minus 40. So QS is equal to 80. Okay. Okay. So the second question says we should find the supply curve. Again, I told you the supply curve is a subset of the supply function. So the supply curve, recall that the supply curve shows the relation between quantity supplied of the good and the price of the good itself, all things being equal. So what we want to find is we want to find the relationship between QS and PS, all things being equal. So what we do is we do the same thing here, but here we don't substitute for the price of the good itself. What we do is we substitute for all the explanatory variables except for the price of the good itself. Because if you substitute for the price of the good itself, you come back to this answer. Okay. So you substitute for all other explanatory variables except for the price of the good itself. So what you do here is QS is equal to 200 plus 3PS minus 4PY minus EP. So substitute for PW and EP. we don't substitute for PS. We want to find a supply curve. Okay, we want to find the relationship between QS and PS, all things being equal. So what we do here is we substitute PS for 10 and we substitute EP for 200. Okay, so this is a number, this is a number, and this is a number. So we simplify it and we get our supply curve. Okay, so this 200 will cancel this 200. We have 3 PS minus 40. Okay, so this is our supply curve. So our supply curve is QS is equal to 3P minus 40. Okay, so that becomes our supply curve. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the next step, the next question was to sketch the supply curve. The next question was to sketch the supply curve. So in sketching the supply curve, I told you the reason why we are using a linear supply function and a linear demand function is that we want things to be simple. Okay. In sketching a supply curve, this is a straight line. Okay. It's a linear function. So you just need 2 points on the curve to sketch it. Okay. So now the supply curve is given by this linear function. QS is equal to 3PS minus 40. By definition, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Okay, so we have to sketch a straight line. Therefore, we need 2 points on the supply curve to sketch it. So we can do this by finding the intercepts. So what we do is we find QS when PS is equal to 0, and then we find PS when QS is equal to 0. That's what that we do. So we call this the horizontal intercept. So the horizontal intercept is when PS is equal to. So we want to find where the curve touches the horizontal axis, the the Q axis. Okay. So the horizontal intercept is when PS is equal to. So what you have to do is just substitute P to be equal to 0 in the supply curve. Okay, so we have the supply curve as 3QS minus 3PS minus 40. QS is equal to, so we are substituting P to be 0. So we say we are substituting P to be 0. So we put 0 here. 0 times any number will give you 0. So you have QS to be equal to minus 40. Okay. Then we'll find the vertical intercept. We find the vertical intercept. So the vertical intercept, so we want to find where the curve touches the P axis. Okay, we want to find this point. So we have, we substitute QS to be 0. We want to find the vertical intercept. So just the supply curve is 3QS is equal to 3PS minus 40. So we are saying that we are substituting QSS to be 0. So 0 is equal to 3PS minus 40. So this becomes a simple linear equation. Okay, so we'll group like terms. So we'll send minus 40 to the other side of the equation. It's negative. So if it causes the equal sign, becomes positive. So this is equal to 40 is equal to 3PS. Then we want PS, not 3PS. So we divide here by 3, we divide here by 3. So we have PS, 3 will cancel 3. So we have PS is equal to 40 divided by 3. Okay. So PS is equal to 13.33. So we put minus 40 will be on the left hand side of the Q axis. Okay. Then positive PS will be here. Okay. Anyway, so remember we are sketching. We are not drawing it to scale. So you can even draw this first before you find the points. Okay. So you put QS is equal to 40 here. PS is equal to 133. So this is a supply curve. So this line is 3QS is equal, sorry, QS is equal to 3PS minus 40. So this is, we sketch the supply curve. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in a normal circumstance, I'm supposed to give you like 5 minutes break, but we are using data. Okay. And people's phone are going off. They have 5% and 1%. So continue. Okay. Ejuma, I'm recording it. I'll send it to you so that I watch it again.
Hey.
Okay. So we have equilibrium in the market. So competitive equilibrium. So we're coming to talk about equilibrium in the market. So we have two agents. We have producers. We have consumers. Remember, the demand curve depends on reservation price of consumers, which is equal to the highest amount they are willing to pay for your product. Then the supply curve depends on the reservation price of producers, which represent the lowest amount they are willing to accept for a product. Okay, so the price in the demand curve and the price in the supply curve, the quantity demanded in the demand curve and the quantity demanded in the supply curve, they are not the same. Okay, so before we can talk about equilibrium, let's talk about this definition. So we have equilibrium price, and it's a price that equates quantity demanded with quantity supplied. Equilibrium quantity is the quantity of a good determined by the equilibrium price, where the amount of output that consumers demand is equal to the amount that producers want to supply. So our market equilibrium will only occur. So we have only one market equilibrium, and this will only occur at the price where the quantity demanded by consumers equals the quantity supplied by producers. Okay, so we have equilibrium when QD is equal to QS. So in solving your question, for instance, you have to state the equilibrium condition before you solve the question. Okay, so you note that, let me bring this equation at least. Okay, so here, so before you can solve a simultaneous equation, okay, the number of unknowns should be equal to the number of equations. The number of unknowns means that the number of variables that you want to find should be equal to the number of equations. So most of the time, you have two equations, then you're finding x and y. So the number of unknowns are x and y, and then the number of equations are equation one and equation two, two equations. Okay. You cannot solve simultaneous equation with three unknowns and two equations. Okay. So for instance, so our demand curve is equal to QD is equal to A minus BP. Our supply is QS is equal to C plus DP. This quantity demanded is not the same as this quantity supplied. Okay. So we have three unknowns. We have QD, we have QS, then we have P. Okay. So we can't solve this equation. We can only solve this equation at the point where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. So that is the equilibrium point. So you only have equilibrium in the market when quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. So for instance, when you go to the market, okay, you call something, there's something you call price haggling. And I know most of us have done it before. When you go to the market and buying a product, the seller will tell you maybe I'll sell it for 10 cedis. Then you will say you pay 5 cedis. Okay. So he comes to 9, then you go to 6. Then you go to, he comes to 8, and he said, this is the last quarter. Then he said, your reservation price is 7 cedis. So if he's not able to come down to your level, then there'll be no exchange. Okay, so in that case, you people didn't get an equilibrium. Okay, but if it comes to maybe 7 cedis 50 pesos, and you're willing to pay 7 cedis 50 pesos, then there will be an equilibrium, there will be an exchange. So there's an equilibrium there. Okay, so the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are different. The only time that there will be equilibrium is when the quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. Okay, so in equilibrium, quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. So you can write QD. So in equilibrium, you can write QD is equal to QS, and you represent it by a single Q. So you write is equal to Q. So you can substitute that Q in place of QD and QS. So that becomes a simultaneous equation. So you can solve for quantity and for price. Okay. Okay. So this is how the equilibrium looks like. Okay. So we have demand, we have supply. In equilibrium, quantity demanded is equal to quantity supply. So quantity demanded is equal to quantity supply occurs only at the point of intersection of the two uh, lines. Okay, at the point of intersection of the two lines, we have equilibrium. So this is where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. And when we solve these two equations simultaneously, we'll be able to find the equilibrium quantity and we'll be able to find the equilibrium price. Okay. So let me use this table as an example. So for instance, if the price of the good is 10 cedis, consumers are willing to purchase 5 units of the product, but because the price is high, suppliers are willing to supply 60 units. Okay, so here there's excess supply of the good in the market. Okay, consumers are only willing to buy 5, producers are selling 50 units. So there's excess of 55 in the market. Okay, if there's an excess of a product of a good in the market, there's a tendency for the price to fall. Okay, if there's excess in the market, there's a tendency for the price to fall because some of the sellers will be willing to reduce their price in order to sell the good. For instance, if there's tomatoes, if you are selling tomatoes and it's in its season, okay, if you don't sell it, if you don't reduce the price, it will just be there and it will get spoiled. Okay, so when there's excess of the good in the market, there's a tendency for the price to fall. So if the price is 9, the law of demand says that quantity demanded will be increasing, but quantity supply will be decreasing. Okay, it's 8, demand is increasing to 17, quantity supply is reducing to 50. So here, still, there's excess supply of the good in the market. Okay, price is 7, we have quantity demanded 23, quantity supply is 45. Price, still, there's a surplus. If the price is 1 cedi, consumers, the price is very low, so consumers are willing to supply 59. Sorry, consumers are willing to consume 59. Producers will only be willing to sell 10. So here, demand is more than supply, so there's shortage. There's shortage of the good in the market. When there's a shortage, there's a tendency for the price to increase because some people may want to pay higher for the products. Okay, some people may have higher reservation price than others. Okay, so when the price increases to 2, the law of demand says that quantity demanded will be falling, but suppliers are more motivated to increase their quantity because the price is increasing. When the price increases to 3, quantity demand falls to 47, quantity supply increases to 25. Okay, so we have only equilibrium when the price is 5. So when the price is 5, consumers are willing to consume 35, producers are willing to supply 35. So we have equilibrium at this point. Okay, so now we'll come to talk about what happens, the reason why we only have one equilibrium in the market, the reason why there was going to be only equilibrium at this point. Okay, so suppose there's a price that is above the equilibrium price. So here the equilibrium price is 5. Okay, suppose there's a price that is above the equilibrium price. You see that, for instance, if the price is 8, okay, consumers are willing to consume 17, producers are willing to sell 50. So there's excess supply of the good in the market of about 33 units. Okay, the excess supply of the good in the market uh, uh, rationally tells us that there's a tendency for the price to fall because some sellers will be willing to reduce their price in order to sell their products. Okay, so that there's tendency for the price to fall. As the price is falling from 8 to 7, you see that demand will be increasing, then supply will be decreasing. So this process will continue. The price will fall and fall. When price is falling, demand will be increasing, supply will be decreasing. So this will continue up to the point we have a new equilibrium. We have an equilibrium at this point. Okay. So at this point, there's no tendency, there's no motivation for uh, consumers to producers to reduce the price because if they reduce the price, they're going to sell just 30 units. Consumers will be willing to sell to buy 41. Here, there will be shortages in the market. And when there's a shortage, there's a tendency for the price to increase. Okay. When there's a shortage, there's a tendency for the price to increase. As the price is increasing, quantity demanded will be decreasing. Some people's reservation price will not be consistent with the increasing price. And when the price is increasing, the quantity supply will be increasing. Okay, the law of supply, and this process will continue to where we come back to the equilibrium point. Okay, so that is here. Okay, so suppose Can you see it? You have to manage it when you have the used
Yes,
laptop.
we can see it.
Yes. Okay. So when the price is higher than the equilibrium price, so PH is higher than the equilibrium price, when you trace it to the demand curve, consumers are willing to consume Q naught. Okay. Consumers are willing to buy Q naught. When you trace it to the supply curve, producers are willing to supply Q1. Okay. So this creates a surplus of Q1 minus Q naught. So this is a surplus. This distance is a surplus. And we call this surplus excess supply of goods in the market. And when there's excess supply of the good in the market, there's the tendency to decrease the price. There's a tendency for price to decrease. So excess supply of good has a tendency to decrease price. Okay. When price is falling from pH, okay, the law of supply says that quantity supply will be falling. The law of demand says the quantity demanded will be increasing. Okay. So this process will continue up to the point where we have equilibrium at this point. Okay. And at this point, we have quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, and it happens at the price, at the equilibrium price. Okay. Again, when the price is lower than the equilibrium price, the quantity that suppliers are willing to supply is Q naught, but the quantity that producers are willing to demand is Q1, because now prices are very cheap, so they are willing to buy more. Okay, so this creates a shortage of Q1 minus Q naught. So this becomes a shortage. Okay, Q1 minus Q naught. So we call this excess demand for goods, and this excess demand for good has a tendency to increase price. Okay, has a tendency to increase price. So you see, as price is increasing from pH towards PE, okay, quantity supplied will be increasing. Okay, and as price is increasing, quantity demanded will be decreasing. Okay, because of the law of demand. And this process will continue up to the point we come back to the equilibrium point where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supply, and it happens at price PE. Okay, so that's why equilibrium will only occur at this point, because when there's a price that is higher or lower than the equilibrium price, the forces of demand and supply and the law of supply and the law of demand will shift it back to this equilibrium. Okay. Okay. So next thing we'll talk about is welfare. Okay. We talk about welfare. So the welfare of society, we have two consumers, two agents. We have consumers and we have producers. Okay, consumers have this demand curve, producers have the supply curve. Okay, so I told you different consumers have different reservation price. So a surplus to a consumer, for instance, is if you are going to the market to buy a laptop and you budgeted to buy the laptop for 1,000 cedis, but when you go to the market, the price of the laptop is 700 cedis, then it means that as a surplus to you, the consumer, you are getting 300 cedis, because you budgeted that your reservation price is going to be your reservation price is going to be 1,000. So that's the highest amount you are willing to pay for the product. When you go to the market and the price of the product is 700, so a surplus to you will be 1,000 minus 700. So that 300 cedis that would have used to buy the laptop now becomes a surplus to you. Okay, who is that? Simon. Or I should call you Simon. Right. Okay, so that becomes a surplus to the consumer. And uh, so we call that consumer surplus. Okay. So for instance, suppose this is our demand curve. Okay, suppose this is our demand curve. At the price of 5, we are going to consume 0 units of the product. If the price falls from 5 to 4, we are consuming 1. the price falls to 3, we are consuming 2. The price is 2, we are consuming 3. So law of demand, falling prices, increasing in quantity. Okay. Now suppose the price of the good in the market, the equivalent price of the good in the market is 2. Okay. Then it means that when we are selling one quantity, what consumers were willing to pay for 1 unit of the product was 4 cedis. Okay. But what they actually pay for is 2 cedis. So at 1 unit of the product, we are getting this surplus, the surplus of this triangle. Okay. Sorry, the surplus of this rectangle. And when the quantity is 2 in the market, we're willing to pay 3 cedis for the product and buy these 2 units. But when we went to the market, we paid 2 cedis for it. Okay. We paid 2 cedis per unit for it. So it means that this becomes a surplus to us. So this rectangle also becomes a surplus to us. So there are small changes in the quantity. So we have 0.1, 0.2. So mathematically, our consumer surplus will just be equal to the area above the equilibrium price, but below the demand curve. So this becomes our consumer surplus. This area becomes our consumer surplus. This area becomes our consumer surplus. It means that, so this, because you are using simple linear functions, the area of this, the consumer surplus becomes the area of this triangle. So we can use the formula for triangle to find our consumer surplus. So the consumer surplus is the area above the equilibrium price but below the demand curve. So this becomes our consumer surplus. Okay, so area of this triangle, half base times height. So this will be your height, this will be your base. Okay, this can be your height and this can be your base because this is a right angle triangle. It has 90 degrees here. Okay, so here can be height, here can be height, here can be base, here can be base. And multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter whether you use this as your height or your base, you still get the same answer. Okay, 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2. That's what I mean by multiplication is commutative. Okay, so consumer surplus by definition is the area above the equilibrium price but below the demand curve, the area of this triangle. Then as a producer too, if you budgeted, if you want to sell your good for the lowest amount you'll be willing to accept for your good is 500 cedis. Then you went to the market and you're able to sell it for 700 cedis. So that 200 cedis, the difference becomes a surplus to the consumer. Okay, the 200 cedis becomes a surplus. You wanted to sell it for 500 cedis, but I went to the market and you sold it for 700 cedis. The difference of 200 becomes a surplus to the producer. Okay, so if you have the producer surplus, it's also just the area above the supply curve but below the equilibrium price. The area above the supply curve but below the equilibrium price. So this becomes the producer surplus. So I've made it more nice here. So when you say it, so this is the equilibrium in the market. This is the demand curve. This is our supply curve. Our supply curve is QS is equal to C plus DPS. Our demand curve is QD is equal to A minus BPS. Okay. We have P on the vertical axis. We have Q on the horizontal axis. Where the two curves meet at the equilibrium. So we label here E. We have the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. Okay. And we do this by solving these two lines simultaneously. So solve this equation and this equation simultaneously. But you note that QS is different from QD. So we only get equilibrium when QS is equal to QD is equal to Q. Okay, so in equilibrium, quantity demanded should be equal to quantity supply. Then this should be Q and this will be Q. So or QS. Then you get simultaneous equation, equation 1, equation 2. Q is equal to this, Q is equal to that means that you can just equate the right hand side. Then you solve for PS. Afterwards, you substitute the PS into any of the two equations. Then you get the QS. So you get QU here and you get PE here. Okay, that becomes the equilibrium price and quantity. Then consumer surplus is the area above the equilibrium price, but below the demand curve. So the area of this triangle where I've put in CS here, okay? That's the consumer surplus, consumer surplus. So the area of the consumer surplus is the area of triangle B, PE, and E. So triangle B, PE, and E. These are the vertices of the triangle, okay? The area of a triangle mathematically is half base times height, half base times height. So the base of the of this triangle can be PE and E. Okay, the distance between PE and E. So distance, this is how I write distance in mathematics. Okay, so the bar and the bar here. So PE, E. So the distance between PE and E is the base. Then the height is the distance between B and PE. The distance between B and PE. So this distance, okay, and this distance. Note that you'll be able to find this. You'll be able to find. So all these are there's a number here. There's a number here, right? There's a number here. There's a number here. All this. When you solve this simultaneously, when you are sketching the demand curve, you need 2 points. Okay, when Q is equal to 0, you find this P. When P is equal to 0, you find a Q here. I didn't put that Q here. No. Then, because you don't need it for the consumer supply, that's why I didn't put it here. Then on the supply curve, when P is equal to 0, you get this Q. When QS is equal to, you get this P. Okay, so these are our numbers. And the equilibrium is when you solve these two simultaneously. Okay, so the area of the triangle, so the distance from this point to this point is the same as the distance from this point to this point. Okay, they are opposite side, and this is a rectangle. For a rectangle, opposite sides are equal. Okay, so the distance from here to here is the same as the distance from here to here. Distance from here to here is the same as the distance from here to here. For rectangle, opposite sides are equal. So the distance from here to here is the same as the distance from here to here, and the distance from here to here. So this origin. So this point is 0, 0. So the distance from here to here is Q minus 0. Okay, so QE minus 0. That will be the distance. The distance from here to here is, so we subtract the smallest, area cannot be negative. So you subtract the smallest value from the biggest value. So B minus PE. So these are numbers. If you multiply them and divide by 2, you have your consumer surplus. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Say go over again.
Hey,
I'll do the other one so that you know.
Say go over again.
I'll do the producer surplus. So look at that. We are recording this. I'm not supposed to go over. You just go and watch it again. Pause and play, pause, play, then you get it before you come to the next class. Okay. Okay. Somebody's making noise. Okay.
It's
So
Precious. That boy.
Precious Noyabema.
He said she's a woman, 52 years. She's a woman, 52 years.
Okay, so producer surplus is equal to, so the producer surplus is the area above the supply curve but below the equilibrium price. So this triangle, you see there's a big triangle here and we divided it into two. Okay, so the upper one is consumer surplus, the lower one is the producer surplus. Okay, so the producer surplus is the area of this triangle. Okay, the area of this triangle. So the area of triangle A, PE, and E. That's the producer surplus. So area of a triangle is half base times height. So half the base again is PE, the distance between PE and E. Then the height is the distance between A and PE, the distance between A and PE. So the distance between PE and E is the same as the distance between 0 and QE. So QE minus 0. Then the distance between PE and A is PE minus A. Subtract the smallest value, A, from PE. Okay, don't get producer surplus to be negative or consumer surplus to be negative. Okay, so that is how the consumer surplus also look like. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. So we'll talk about something we call comparative status. Okay. We'll talk about comparative status is just how now we did talk about change what shape the demand curve and what shape the supply curve. We said for so suppose this is the initial quantity. The initial demand curve, and this is the initial supply curve. So it means that this will be our equilibrium, and the equilibrium at this equilibrium, we are selling the good for $45 at a price of 100 cedis. Okay, at a price of 100 cedis. Now, suppose this good is a normal good, and there's an increase in income, or or this good has a substitute, and there's an increase in the price of the substitute. So I'm talking about the things that will shift the supply curve upwards. Okay, so I told you the demand curve upwards. I told you for demand curve to shift, if there's a change in income, you have to first consider whether the good is a normal good or an inferior good. If the good is a normal good and there's an increase in income, it will shift the demand curve upwards. If it's an inferior good and there's a decrease in income, it will shift the demand curve upwards. For the price of a substitute to increase, shift the demand curve upwards. The reduction of a complement, the price of a complement will shift the demand curve upwards. Number of producers increasing, advertising increasing, taste and preferences increasing, shift the demand curve upwards. Okay, all the things that shift the demand curve upwards. So suppose the demand curve shifts upwards like this. Okay, then it means that at the same price, consumers are willing to consume 108 units of the product instead of 100. Okay, because it's a normal good and their income has increased, for instance, they want to consume 108 of the goods at the same price. Okay, but note that here we have both supply and demand curve. We are not only talking about the demand consumers, we are talking about producers too. So at this price, $45, consumers are willing to supply 108. Sorry, consumers are willing to buy 108. Producers are only, remember, nothing has happened to the supply curve. Okay, so the suppliers are only willing to supply 100. Okay, so here there's a shortage in the market. Producers are selling 100, consumers are willing to buy 108. So when there's excess supply of the good in the market, there's a tendency for price to increase. When there's excess demand of the good in the market, there's tendency for the price to increase. So the price will be increasing from 45. As the price is increasing, the law of demand says that quantity demanded will be falling. Okay, so quantity demanded will be coming back like this. Then as the price is increasing, the law of supply says that quantity supply will be increasing. It will be moving from point A to point B. Okay, so to be increasing from 100 towards 104. And this process will continue up to the point where we have a new equilibrium at this point, where the new demand curve intersects the old supply curve. Okay, so I have a new equilibrium at this point. And at this new equilibrium, quantity increases from 100 to 104, and price increases from 45 to 49. Okay, so we get a new equilibrium at this point. So when non-price demand factors change, the demand curve shifts and produce a change in equilibrium price and quantity. So for instance, increase in demand. So increase in demand is a shift in the demand curve upwards. Increase in demand leads to an increase in both equilibrium price and quantity. Okay, so you see that a shift in the demand curve upwards increase equilibrium price and it increases equilibrium quantity.
Who is that?
Yeah, we have 16 employees.
Hey, somebody is blaring.
Raymond,
How can you mail wow. People, if it says you don't get all the problem, you don't
Raymond.
in a class.
Raymond.
Yeah,
sometimes you use your common sense to do something. What's that?
Okay, it's okay.
Yeah, blow.
Mobile.
Precious. I muted all of you, so why are you still talking? Okay, so you see that an increase in the demand curve with supply constant increases both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Okay, increases both equilibrium price. So an increase in demand with, let me add this, with supply constant leads to an increase in both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So you see the demand curve shift upwards, and we have equilibrium price increasing, equilibrium quantity increasing at this point. Okay. Again, so changes in supply. So we'll also talk about how changes in the other factors of supply shift the supply curves. So like input prices, increase in input prices will shift the supply curve upwards. Taxes will shift the supply curve upwards. Then expectation about future price will shift the supply curve upwards. Okay. So when there's a shift in the supply curve upwards with demand constant, it leads to an increase in equilibrium price and a reduction in equilibrium quantity. Okay. For a decrease in supply with demand constant. With demand constant leads to an increase in the equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity. Okay. Yep. Then we have simultaneous shift in both demand and supply. Okay. So this is messy. Okay. But let's use this table. So suppose there's a simultaneous shift in both demand and supply. Okay. So we have increase in supply and increase in demand. When there's increase in supply and increase in demand, the price effect on price is ambiguous because you don't know price will increase and then it will decrease. So you don't know the effect. It depends on how it depends on the effect of the increase in demand and effect of increase in supply. But quantity will definitely increase when there's an increase in demand and there's an increase in supply. Quantity will definitely increase, but the effect on price is ambiguous. You don't know that. So we can use example to see this. I think next week. I said I'll do an example. Okay, so next week I'll do an example of the shifts and an example of the other one. Then I'll give you an exercise. So we have increase in supply and decrease in demand. When there's an increase in supply and there's a decrease in demand, price will decrease, but quantity, effect on quantity will be ambiguous. We wouldn't know that unless we draw the curves. Okay. When there's decrease in supply and increase in demand, price increases, but effect on demand is ambiguous. When there's decrease in supply and decrease in demand, effect on price is ambiguous, quantity decreases. Okay. So this example that we'll do next week, if I'm to start now, we'll use like 3 hours to finish. So, and this example that I was asking you, if you get a day, so we can do it. So, Ishak, Faisal.
Dog.
So you said tomorrow, eh?
Yeah, tomorrow. So when you tell me your availability, then I'll fix it around.
Okay, so you discuss it with the class first. I don't want to impose anything on you. So you discuss it with the class first, and maybe 5:30. You let me know. Okay, 5:30 there. Then I shall remember there, so I can do that.
Yeah, macho.
You don't like oh, so I told you last time that the moment you tell me maybe it's time or anything, telling me there's match and all those things. So I'm the one sacrificing.
No.
So
match.
Do you think you like football? You know the way I like
Roxanne, I would try. You know how much you for Sudi in Roxanne, I would try.
Okay, so the thing is, if at 5:30 you can make it, fine. I will be able to then solve this example. Else I will give you the so we'll do this example tomorrow or at 5:30 as if you all agree. Fine. If you don't agree, then we'll do it next week before we start the
Yes. Agreed. You did
then they'll do this example too. So we'll do these two examples. Then I'll give you an assignment on this too. Okay, so this covers like everything that we've done. So there's a demand curve function, this is demand curve. These are the equilibrium prices that are given. So you determine the quantity of pack of food sold. Okay, determine the quantity of pack of food sold in the markets. You find the demand and the supply curve for the product. So demand and supply curve. You get demand from this, you get supply from this. So these are things that even tomorrow you can try and do it in the morning before we meet. And if you are getting it right, then you know that you're on the right direction. Okay. Then you determined equilibrium price and quantity. This is not much. Equilibrium price and quantity for anti-mess foods. And you show the equilibrium graphical, so it means I have to draw the equilibrium, okay? And examine the welfare of economic agents. So I didn't tell you about total welfare. So total welfare is the addition of producer surplus and consumer surplus, okay? You can sometimes say, find the total welfare of the society. Okay? So examine the welfare of economic agents means find consumer surplus and producer surplus. Suppose a lump sum tax of 4 cedis is imposed on the by the management of estimate the new equilibrium price and quantity. So you have to find a new supply curve, okay? Then you have to find equilibrium price and quantity. Represent the demand curve or the new supply curves on one graph and estimate deadweight loss. So the reason why I'm going to solve this example cry is because of this deadweight loss, okay? That one you need an example before you understand it. If not, like I'll give you this one as an assignment. So because of that, then what type of good is anti-mess food to consumers? What is the relationship between anti-mess food and homemade food? Okay, when you read the this thing, you will get why we're asking that question. So this is, you are the country manager of a firm that produces a generic type of soft drink in a competitive market in Ghana. In addition to the number of generic products in your market, you also compete against brands such as Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So both are due to the successful lobbying efforts of sugar producers in Ghana. Parliament levies a 1.2 cedis per pound tax on all imported raw sugar, the primary input for your products. In addition, Coke and Pepsi launches an aggressive advertising campaign designed to persuade consumers that their branded products are superior to generic soft drinks. How would this event impact the market outcome of generic soft drinks if the effect of the tariff is higher than the effect of advertising of Coke and Pepsi on the generic type of soft drink? Explain with appropriate graph. So maybe I'll give this one to you as an assignment, then I'll solve this one. So I'll see you guys tomorrow at 5:30. Call me to remind me, okay?
Sure, I'll call you.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Okay. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right,
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
Don't forget to send a recording.
So are we getting the recording?
I have to finish
So the slides.
the slides. I have to make corrections in it. I'll send it to you tomorrow morning, okay?
Okay.
Yes, teacher.
May God bless you, sir.